Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 14 of 5 Reasons Not to Harm Your Loved Ones During Quarantine. Today, we'll follow up a little bit on yesterday, go back to the basics a little bit as well. I'm going to do stats at the end today instead of at the beginning. So first and foremost, let's review what the 5 are, and I'll update you in each of those categories. First and foremost, the protective services workers are absolutely essential workers. And before the latest press conference and extension of the stay-home, stay-in-place order, we had a situation where protective services was construing the stay-at-home order through its directives internally through DHHS that any family who had child in foster care could not have any in-person parenting time, regardless of what the reunification status was. This is obviously caused great disruption in reunification efforts and was seen as it violating the constitutional mandate that it is a fundamental right for parents to parent their children and children's fundamental rights to be parented by their parents. So that was something that occurred, now 4 weeks ago when this all first started. Now, in the latest executive order that Governor Whitmer just put in effect last week, that extends it till May 1st, we're in a situation where it actually, if you look at the question and answers or frequently asked questions section of the order, hold on one second, I have it right here. It's a really helpful section actually. But as we mentioned, the Supreme Court has mandated that all custody orders remain in effect as far as parenting time provisions in divorce cases or in domestic relations cases that deal with custody. So one of the frequently asked questions was, how does this order impact custody agreements? How does this order impact parents' visits with their children placed in foster care? So now that provision that had been kind of a policy of DHHS is now being interpreted by the governor, and she states, individuals may also travel as required by law enforcement or a court order, including the transportation of children pursuant to a friend of the court custody agreement under Section 7B4 of this order. Court-ordered parent-child visits related to a child custody arrangement continue, but these visits need not always be in person. Alternatives, including telephone and video conference, are acceptable. So the impact of this is that basically she's saying is that you don't have to have in-person visits, even if it's pursuant to the court order. I would strongly recommend, if the pattern of parenting is in-person visits, that continues. Unless, of course, there's some substantial reason or that it shouldn't continue in person, because certainly lack of contact and current practices are always going to be illustrative of some part of the relationship or the bond between parent and child. Now, the real troubling part of all of this is the next paragraph. Visits between a child and parent while a child resides in foster care are limited to telephone and video conference or other technology. Limited exceptions can be made if there is risk of severe psychological harm. Exceptions must be approved by the executive director of the Children's Services Agency. In-person visits at a child caring institution need not occur unless a court order requires in-person contact to occur and if it can be safely facilitated. Safely facilitated, as we all know, means you're going to be 6 feet apart. It sounds great in theory that there is this exception, but in practice, how are you going to keep a young child whose parenting time has been very limited by video or FaceTime or whatever for the last month? How are you going to keep them 6 feet away from their parent? So that is the update with protective services. And, there's investigations going on by protective services for people who are having too many others at their home. You can't have all your kids' friends over, or you can't have a bunch of couples over. That is violating the governor's order. And in doing that, there may be a call to protective services if there are children at risk of being contaminated in those situations. That hasn't happened to my knowledge, but it is something that could happen. The other thing is that if children if children are exposed to their own parents who are working frontline and their parents are showing symptoms and the children aren't protected and quarantined, that could necessitate a call to protective services as well. And in other states, protective services has been coming in under those circumstances. So that is really scary. The thing that has been happening on the protective services front is obviously if they were to get a call about a home that isn't clean, where before that would be intervention services immediately put in place, depending on how much of a disarray or unkept the home is, could be all different kinds of solutions. But at this time, I know that my house isn't as clean as it usually is, and I think probably other people are in the same boat as I am. But that's, something to consider, is if there was a call that, your kids were outside unsupervised, or if there was a call that the kids were outside dirty, they saw them in the same clothes every day. All those normal kind of neglectful calls that can lead to protective services coming to your home, they can still happen. So it's important that you do maintain the cleanliness and appearance and don't have kids in situations where they could possibly face removal, because honestly, it's so easy to have them removed and so hard to get them back. So moving on to reason number 2, which is that the police are essential workers. And yes, there is some overlap. If if protective services were coming, it's highly likely that the police would be coming with them. I would note that on average, and I only have a statistic for Wayne County, but in Wayne County, they have been giving between 20 and 40 tickets for the civil $1,000 fine every day since it started, which is astounding to me that people are not, at least the possibility of this fine isn't a deterrent. Most of them have been given for people gathering who shouldn't have been, and again, that's the civil ticket. The difference being that it's $1,000 fine. If you get that ticket, there's no possibility of going to jail. You can contest it, but it's civil. It's a different burden of proof. Everything is different. It's all about the money. The criminal sanction for violating is the one where you possibly could face jail time, and that has a $500 fine and or 90 days in jail. And again, the difference that I've seen between people getting the criminal sanction or the civil sanction is based on a couple different factors. First and foremost is, do the police really care about you? Are you a risk to the community? Of course, they care about you as a citizen, but are you a risk to the community? And if you have no prior record and, you have a pretty clean driving record, chances are they're going to go civil. If you're a troublemaker, if this is your, 15th time being pulled over, if you don't have a valid license, if you have a trend of breaking the law, then certainly that's going to matter, and that is going to probably get you the criminal sanction. The criminal sanction, not only are you subject to a $500 fine and or 90 days in jail, you're going to have to go to court unless you just pay the fine. But it is a misdemeanor. You will have a criminal record if you get that and are convicted of that, or you can fight it and go through the court system. Herein lies the problem. This ticket is not considered an essential proceeding. So you can file, or we file, to get a hearing on this, but your hearing is going to be, who knows, 4 months, 5 months from now. Basically, what's happening in our court system right now is we are only proceeding with hearings that are constitutionally guaranteed to be within a certain amount of time. So if someone is arrested, they're going to be arraigned within the 24, 48 hours. It's now being done by video for the most part, but every jurisdiction is different. If we file a bond motion to get someone out of jail or out of prison or out of a correctional institute from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, those are considered essential hearings, and we're going to get those heard right away. We are trying to the best that we can to have our criminal cases go forward, but it's very difficult to have a hearing where we can communicate with our client at the same time we're communicating with the court. So a lot of our more critical hearings are not happening to move the case forward for that reason. And because there's in certain jurisdictions, they're down to, for example, in Macomb County, they have 4 judges working per day. And they have, one judge who's hearing, all the criminal cases or criminal emergency cases for a bunch of judges. There's one who's handling pre-trials for civil cases. It's broken down. There's a probate judge, and probate is something that we probably should all be thinking about, not because we want to go to probate court, but because we need to avoid it. So this is a time that we should be looking at our estate planning, looking at medical directives, looking at powers of attorney, things like that. And certainly, you should look, I believe it was episode 12 last Friday. Carly Babby, she did the live, and it was super cool because it was her first time, and she talked all about your estate planning needs. So it's there. I believe it's episode 12, but it was definitely last Friday. Other things the police are really out there for in looking at these tickets and these fines are going to be boating issues. That is one thing that there is major uproar about is, first people said that you could go on your own boat with your own family. I talked about yesterday a little bit how that's a little complicated because how are you going to get your boat out of storage if it's not open? And then what the governor cites, and again, I'll just read from her frequently asked questions page on. Did you know Governor Whitmer has her own page about COVID-19? Great resources. You just put in her name, and then you'll get to it. And I apologize that I don't think I might have the site right here. Well, let's talk about this first, and then if I have it, I'll go back there. So the question is, am I able to use my motor-powered boat for recreational purposes, including fishing? No. The governor's revised Stay Home, Stay Safe Executive Order 2020-42, which deals with physical outdoor activity. It talks about kayaking, canoeing, and sailing. A use of motorboat, jet ski, or similar watercraft includes gas and electric motors is not permitted for the duration of the executive order. And then the reason that is cited is because the DNR has reported to the governor about an abundant and heavy use of boat launches across the state and a congregation of people at the boat launches. So that is deemed as threatening the public health. And then there is the secondary services. There's the gas, the parts. And so the hope is, and the purpose of this is to reduce the movement of and the contact among people with the intent of slowing the spread. So that's why the long distance travel has been prohibited, and that is why you cannot go on your own boat. Now, I think that there's an argument to be made that if your boat is already in the water, if you can launch it at your own home or privately, that there's probably no difference between your boat and a sailboat. I think that, obviously the gas is the issue. There's been no comment officially about if you were to launch at a private club and get your gas at a private club and there was social distancing in place, how that would play out and how it would comport with the order. But right now, the police on the lake see you out there in a motorboat, you could get the $1,000 ticket or the $500 misdemeanor. So other stuff, let's talk for a minute about, while we're on the police, number 2, about the protests that are happening. And it's really interesting because, and we've talked about this in other episodes, how at what point do constitutional rights in the balance of the need to protect the public health or promote a substantial and compelling reason, which would be protecting the public health, to invade those rights. Obviously, there's a freedom of assembly and a freedom of speech, and these protests are going on. I think there's a big one scheduled either today or tomorrow in Lansing, where they're planning on blocking the streets. But I'm really uncertain of the details of that, but it's legal and they can do it. However, if they're not 6 feet apart, they're going to get the ticket for violating the stay home order, because then they are too close together and the public welfare and health is at risk. So that's going to be kind of the bottom, the bottom line of all of this is going to be, who's it affecting, and are you spreading the virus when you're engaging in this activity? And if you're not spreading the virus, then your private interests may win the balance and outweigh the public health. But if you are violating the distancing provisions, then there is a possibility of spreading, and that's going to be the problem. So, other exciting things as we move on, I didn't see any questions come up yet, so I'm just going to move on. The other things that are happening, very happy to report that the Beaumont health system has taken its lead from Mayor Duggan in Detroit and is now paying all of its essential workers, frontline workers, doctors, everybody hazard pay. I don't have the number for what that is, but that is something that Mayor Duggan announced in Wayne County last Friday, which is really exciting. Both the Oakland County Executive Dave Coulter and Mayor Duggan have been going a long way to put more testing in place and more benefits in place for frontline work. Other things that are going on, if you would like to get your federal stimulus check faster, if you apply online, you can, or if you go online to the IRS website and put in your direct deposit information, then you're going to get it faster than everybody else who needs an envelope and a stamp. A little bit scary stuff. The International Monetary Fund managers have made a prediction that the world economy at the end of this will be in the worst shape since the Great Depression. So again, let's all do our part. Let's stay home. Let's support our local businesses. It's Takeout Tuesday. If you go to wxyz.com, they have a link. We're open for Takeout Tuesday. So let's support our community, keep them in business. Get your federal stimulus check so that you can spend some money, fuel our economy. And, the other thing to think about is that when our economy is going down, crime usually goes up. So it's important to, find the balance there. It is illegal to have firearms and or ammunition in your or in your home without proper permits or licensure. And sometimes in times of crisis, that's the first thing people do is stock up on ammo and weapons, afraid that there's going to be, riots again. So I just wanted to mention that. The Secretary of State has extended, the governor extended, you so that you don't need to renew your license, insurance, or registration. There is a grace period so that in-contact commerce doesn't have to occur. If you're in that situation, I urge you to read that. That's the executive order. I believe it's number 43, and it came out yesterday. Other things, Rutgers University is developing a saliva test. They just received a grant, and so that should be amazing. And the other thing, I'm trying to do good news, bad news here. So another bullet to our seniors in high school. Boston University has announced that they will not start classes in the fall. And it's interesting that that's a path that they chose, being that Boston is not one of the hardest hit cities. And Massachusetts is not one of the hardest hit states. I mean, they're not on the bottom of the list, but they're certainly not in the top 10 as of today. So that seemed interesting to me. And so, especially since I went there. So I really hope that the rest of the schools don't follow suit and delay these kids being able to go to college. But we don't know. Now some statistics. 1,602 deaths right now, and 25,635 as of last night. Obviously, very concerning. Some counties are actually increasing, some are slowing. So it's changing, but I'm not willing to use some of the lingo of the curve is flattening when some counties are still increasing. The one that was named this morning was Genesee. So that Flint area, I don't know why they're increasing right now, and it may just be that they have more tests. And so, again, we've talked about it every day. You've got to be careful what you read into the statistics because there's so many variables and every resource is different. I try to get my facts from the same place every day so that, we're comparing apples to apples. Okay, any questions? Okay, we don't have any questions right now. So, let me see what else I have in my little cheat sheets here. So, I'm just trying to find the governor's website. Well, if you go, it's just the Officer of Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and their website isn't listed. So, yeah, but that's where it is. The Office of Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Other things that are happening in the world, I wanted to just take a minute to kind of just each day add in a little bit of, what is this or what is that? I explained earlier the difference between civil sanctions and criminal sanctions. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the difference between a jail and a prison. And each day I'll kind of fill in with one little tidbit for all of you. Obviously, the lawyers probably already know this, but the non-lawyers that I'm so happy are watching, just to give you some little tidbits each day. So if someone is convicted of a crime and sentenced to a term of incarceration, if that amount of time that they will be deprived of their liberty is less than 1 year, then they are going to go to county jail. County jail is funded by the county. It is usually a division of the county sheriff's department. And when you are sentenced to a jail, then your sentence is considered a determinate sentence. What that means is it's going to be, a certain amount of time, and absolutely positively on that day, you're going to get out. So if someone's 6 months in jail, 6 months, or if they're eligible for good time, it would be shorter, you're going to get out. 90 days on the 90th day, shorter if you're eligible for good time, you're going to get out. When you're counting the day that you're taken into custody, if it's 9 o'clock at night, that counts as a full day. Okay, it doesn't start like with the next day. So just when you're counting, if you are counting. Prison, on the other hand, is an indeterminate sentence. And what that means is that someone receives a sentence that's a range. It could be 3 years to 15 years. What that means is that at the 3-year mark, that is the first time this individual is eligible to be paroled. So this is indeterminate sentencing because the parole board may decide you need to stay for a few more months or for another year, or they may let you out as rehabilitated. So there's all different things that affect the parole decision. And so that's called an indeterminate sentence. Prisons are state funded. and they are under the umbrella of the Michigan Department of Corrections. So a lot of people have heard of Jackson or Ionia. Those are some, Newberry, those are some that, just keep coming up, I think, in the news. Those are all examples of the prisons in Michigan. There are many of them, much more than you would believe. And so that is what gets you into prison, is you have to have a sentence greater than 1 year, and then you have to be paroled to get out. And who usually gets out on their first try? Non-assaultive, non-sexual offenders who did not harm a child. Those are pretty much who's getting out on the first round. It's very difficult for sex offenders or anyone involved in any offense with a child to get out on their first parole date, because a lot of the requirements for them to get out cannot be met in some of the lengths of their sentences. For example, if someone gets a sentence of 1 to 15, that means they would be eligible for parole at the 1 year mark. They are required, if you are a convicted sex offender, to admit what they did. This is like problem numero uno if you have been wrongfully convicted by a jury and you believe you were falsely accused and you're not going to admit. That is going to preclude you probably from being released at that venture. The other thing that happens on the first parole date is if you are a convicted sex offender, you're required to take a sex offender treatment course while you are in prison. Some facilities, like Muskegon, offer the class often, and they have a lot of spots in the class. Other facilities don't offer it often and don't have a lot of seats for people. So there's a waiting list. So someone could potentially, you have to get on the waiting list. They could wait a year to get in the class. The class takes a year. And then they could have already missed their first eligibility for parole. So these are real things that happen within the MDOC. So I like to look at that date as the first opportunity someone has to get out or to be paroled. And depending on the offense and other factors, their behavior in prison, all that stuff, is a matter of if they actually will or not. No guarantee. It's indeterminate sentencing. Okay, so still seeing no questions, but I will wait a minute in case anybody wants to post them or post any. I just want to give you, reason number 5, and that is that very few people look good in horizontal orange stripes or black stripes, depending on where you are, but they're horizontal regardless. And so let's be kind, let's be grateful, be healthy, be happy, stay home, all that stuff. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.